Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. I really enjoyed catching up with Remmer Covington Jr. He's a terrific leader here in coastal Mississippi and really good. We actually had some terrific conversations offline about seafood labeling and some of that stuff, and look forward to continue those conversations with him. And speaking of that, I'm so thrilled actually to have, when I say friend, I'm talking about he is a friend. He's someone that I was in the trenches with over in Alabama after the oil spill. We've been on this show before telling that story, but he's the vice president of Bon Secour Fisheries, a terrific old family business there in South Alabama, and someone I love connecting with. Chris, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well, Ricky. Thanks, and I appreciate you inviting me back on. It's great to see you, and we don't keep up nearly well enough.
Well, we've been through it. You know, you think about anytime something happens in the seafood arena. Right now, we're talking about labeling, but you know, after Katrina, after other disasters, after the oil spill, after the algae bloom of the Bonnie Carey spillway, we tend to get these reminders of how important our commercial fishing industry is to us. And I mean, I can't say enough, whether we're talking about commercial fishing or shrimping or crabbing or oystering. You think about the thousands of people that are employed over the Gulf South. You think about how sought after coastal seafood is. You know, it's a big deal. It's an industry we need to think about and prepare. But like when we had the conversations about oil refineries and the energy policy and all that, it's a global market. I mean, the seafood industry is also a global market. A lot of local seafood guys have found ways to diversify their business by bringing in domestic, and when domestic isn't coming in, they're doing a lot of importing. There's nothing wrong with importing, in fact. I mean, there's some quality product coming in from all over the world. That's actually a good thing. It's just, you know, how you label and what you're saying to your customers is sort of the big deal here. But I wanted to invite you to be part of the conversation, because when we get into just, you know, what's on a menu and substitution and the complexities of all that, it's pretty dynamic, and it's also pretty complicated. We can make it out to be a simple thing, but it's really not a simple thing, is it?
No, it's not. And you were mentioning as I was driving in this morning, it had already gotten fairly warm outside over here and humid, and I'm thinking, man, I'm glad I have a air-conditioned office and an air-conditioned vehicle to go to it. The folks that are out there catching shrimp and oysters and fish for the local restaurants here, they're not in an air-conditioned office. They may have a cabin on their boat if it's large enough to enjoy some air conditioning at night to sleep. But the same way in the kitchens and the people operating those kitchens, they've all got a hard job. And part of the difficulty that the people owning the restaurants face is how to provide seafood for an ever-expanding market, and the fact that the market for seafood is expanding is a great thing, as you touched on. The imported seafood that we are, I won't say forced to enjoy, but that we really have to bring in order to satisfy the demand, is just part of the equation. And it does, when you get down to the need for transparency, which I agree with, it presents lots of challenges for exactly how you go about providing that transparency. And so, you know, just to quote some statistics and give some big picture to this, seafood in general, you're looking at, and this is a newly revised take on it that I think is interesting. It used to be everyone said it's 90-10, 90% imported, 10% domestic. Now the number has been revised, at least in some circles, to something closer to maybe 60 to 70% imported and 30 to 40%, maybe as much as 40% domestic. And the reason for that is there are a lot of seafood products that are caught domestically and then shipped overseas for further processing. One of the big examples is pink salmon in Alaska. Practically all of the pink salmon in Alaska, as I appreciate it, is shipped to China for processing, and then it's shipped back to the United States and to other countries from China. And so in a lot of cases, it's considered Chinese product. And that would be an interesting sidebar to go off on, but I'm not going to suggest we do that. What is that? But in my mind, that's domestically caught pink salmon, and so it's been processed overseas, but it's brought back in. And in a lot of cases, that gets chalked up as an import. If you take those situations out, then you're left with a little more actual domestic seafood. And in the case of salmon, there's a lot of salmon around the world. Some of it's farm raised in countries overseas, but a lot of domestic salmon, particularly in Alaska, is caught and eaten in the United States. And so you see salmon on a lot of menus because it's something that a restaurant can depend on being available most of the time. And again, that's back to what is their challenge. Their challenge is, unless you want to have a restaurant that has a chalkboard that changes every day, and the menu changes every day. And, if somebody comes in and says, man, I really want that teriyaki grilled salmon that I had at your place yesterday. We don't have the salmon today. We've got something we got tilapia. That's disappointing your customer. And that's what restaurants are in the business of not doing, trying to have what they think their customer base wants to eat. So again, I'm trying to say that everybody has a tough job here, and so no excuse for someone someone trying to pull a fast one. And I think that's what a lot of people are upset about, is just tell me what it is I'm eating and I'll make the decision about what I eat. Now, on that point, however, I wrote down a quote, and I don't want to get too broad here, but in a democracy like ours, the public is expected to know what they want. And H.L. Mencken is one of my favorite early 20th century authors. He said, democracy is the theory that the common people, like you and me, Ricky, know what they want and deserve to get it good and hard. I wrote it down. I've heard it said before. And so a lot of times people ask for things that they think they want, and then when it comes to them, they get these unintended consequences. So one of the unintended consequences of fishery management, which we all agree we need because we want the resources that these commercial fishermen are working on, and the recreational fishermen working, catching as well, harvesting, we want those to be sustainable. That's a big word in today's world, sustainability, right? So we want a sustainable resource to be harvested and brought to market and for people to be able to eat. And I want my grandchildren to be able to catch it and eat it, right? That's a common theme. Well, when you buy into that, and I think it's a good thing, you have to accept that there is a limit to what you're going to be able to provide domestically for consumers. And once you do that, you open the door for, and you basically mandate the need for imported products. And particularly in the case of finfish, speckled trout, redfish, to name a couple, red snapper is a good example too. Tremendously restrictive limits on what is available to the common people, the consumer. People that may or may not really care much about going offshore and catching a snapper, or going in the bay and catching a redfish or a speckled trout. In our state here in Alabama, we cannot catch and sell redfish or speckled trout. So that takes a couple of fairly popular or extremely popular food fish off the menu here unless you bring it in from the outside. There are a few domestic states in the Southeast that provide redfish and speckled trout commercially. Again, very small quotas on those. So to provide something like a speckled trout on your menu, you're forced to go to Mexico and bring in a corvina. A redfish, a lot of redfish are farmed in China. Same species, same animal altogether. They actually took some of our redfish over to China and began to farm it in their crawfish ponds. and they're shipping it back over here frozen. It's not a bad product. We sell a lot of it, and it's what has to take the place of something that is a restricted species for sale in a lot of the states. So it's a complicated issue in a lot of ways, but the public needs to understand that when we vote for restrictions, then that's taking some things away from us, and again, understand what you're voting for. And then on the other hand, when you're voting for forcing restaurants to put labels on their menus, make sure you understand that there are going to be situations where your domestic seafood is going to be priced way up, and that you're going to be forced, if you want domestic shrimp, you're gonna be paying for it.
The key is transparency, and in reaction specifically to what happened here in coastal Mississippi, Alabama introduced a law and rapidly passed it. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk a little bit more about what they're going to do. And this is sort of a precursor for what might happen in Mississippi. We'll continue that part of the conversation with Chris Nelson from Bon Secour Fisheries in Alabama right after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank studio. I have my friend, someone I've been in the trenches with before after the oil spill, Chris Nelson, who is a vice president. His family owns Bon Secour Fisheries in South Alabama. I was telling Chris during the break that I thought he did a really good job of explaining how diverse and complicated the conversation is. You just can't make a decision that our restaurant's going to serve only domestic over the long haul and be able to get the product the way you want to. There's going to be some kind of mix and change of various fish along the way. We were explaining, we'll go more to this in just a second, but Mississippi passed legislation to differentiate farm-raised catfish in Mississippi from that is imported. But see, if you want more catfish, you just turn on more ponds. In Mississippi, when we're talking about sustainability, that's not the opportunity. The wild caught requirements and regulations really keep us from being able to do that. So at the end of the day, it really comes back to labeling and transparency and those kinds of things. And even that can't always be so simple. Headline in Alabama, though, on the tail end of high-profile seafood fraud case in Mississippi, where a restaurant admitted to selling mislabeled imported fish as local Gulf seafood, a new Alabama law will go into effect October the 1st, 2024, to prevent similar deception. It was quick, wasn't it, Chris?
It was. Went through Alabama Restaurant and Hospitality Association, engaged with those who introduced the bill, and hammered out something that they're still trying to determine how it will be, I think the word is promulgated, but what rules will be made? How will someone comply with this if they're in the restaurant business? Exactly what will compliance look like? So we'll wait and see what the rule makers come up with, the executive branch, now that the legislative branch has passed the law. And I expect that it will be a change for all restaurateurs to need to comply with this, but I expect that it will also be something that they can comply with fairly. I'm not going to say easily, but they'll be able to survive it. One of the concerns, of course, was that if you print a menu and you're required to put on the menu where the shrimp, fish, whatever came from, and you're getting the fin fish, for instance, from multiple sources, that you would be forced to reprint your menu on a regular basis. And that's back to the, are you going to be a restaurant that has a chalkboard that changes every day, or are you going to print a menu? And most restaurants around here, that are serving anything other than fine dining, they've got a menu that they print maybe 3 or 4 times a year tops. And so to try to accommodate that without it being too much of an added expense and still providing the transparency that everyone wants, that's a tough needle to thread, but I think it can be done, and the right people are working on it right now.
Yeah, I would expect we had a bill. I haven't actually taken the Alabama bill and sat it next to the Mississippi bill that was killed in committee in 2021, but I would bet they're pretty similar. It'd be great actually to learn from Alabama's experience, because our legislative session doesn't start again until after the first of the year. So we'll be able to watch what you guys are doing and how you're going about it, and what the rules are, what's the governing body, and how they doing the enforcing, et cetera. But I would suspect that Mississippi is going to look at it again. I know how you can't look at it again, because what we're really trying to say is that, unfortunately, I wish we didn't need these rules, but we need rules so that folks aren't misleading folks at the end of the day. But this is not a new conversation, is it, Chris? This is a conversation been going on in your industry, especially as imports have become more of the conversation. I mean, there's a lot of restaurants living in a gray area, aren't there?
Yeah, you might put it that way, or really trying to cope with the as I mentioned earlier, the global nature of the supply chain that they're trying to work with. But from day one, probably the first conversation you and I ever had, Ricky, about seafood marketing and promotion was around the issue of people need to understand. I think it was around shrimp, probably at the time after the oil spill. People need to understand where their shrimp are coming from. And I mean, there has been barrels of ink spilt and pallets of cash spent trying to accomplish that. And Mississippi had an effort maybe 5 or 6, maybe 10 years ago now. Every shrimp has a tail, and it's a play on the tail, your TAIL versus TALE. And the tail, the TALE tail of the shrimp was, where did it come from? Who caught it? That whole farm to table type movement and gist that you wanted to give to your marketing campaign. And it was, I hate to say it, had limited success, mostly because it was a very clever effort, but it did not have the high-powered money that that the beef industry or the milk industry would have had behind a similar tale. So it is a challenge. I think in the case of the Alabama labeling rule, we'll see some positive aspects.
I think Chris, we'll have you back. I'm sorry we should have spent the whole show on this, but I just wanted to wet the whistle given the news in Alabama. We'll come back together again and see how things are going. We'll get an update from you. But Chris, it's been a pleasure to spend some time with you.
Thanks, Ricky. Appreciate it.
You bet. This has been Chris Nelson from Bon Secour Fisheries in South Alabama. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.